you ever suspected that this world is not what it seems?
Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain?
Something strange?
Something extraordinary?
If not, do you wish you had?
Do you long to experience that which lies beyond the bounds of the mundane world?
Hidden somewhere just beyond the limits of our senses.
If so, then join us as we take you on a journey
that blurs the lines between the normal and the paranormal. Welcome to Paranormalcy.
Something strange is going on, and we aren't going to tell you that we have all the answers. Through our research, we can tell you a lot about specific events, but at this point, it's pretty evident that the situations are working against us when it comes to connecting those threads. And what I found myself wondering while proofing this episode is, why is that? If the set of facts that's laid before us doesn't make any sense, we're being lied to either overtly or by omission. And for me, the question when it comes to UAP and extraterrestrials is not whether or not they exist, but rather, where is the benefit? We can only speculate so much about this, but let's do what we can.
I have to admit, I had a lot of trouble writing this episode. Until now, I've had a decent understanding of the phenomenon we've covered and even had some of my own experiences to back up my theories. Yet, this topic is one that is elusive by its very nature. The troubling thing is that it's entirely possible that I have had an experience and simply don't know it. In fact, it's possible that many of us have. For those of us who do remember these strange, seemingly non-human visitors, it's clear that they have power over us. Not only in the vastness of their intellect, superiority of their technology, but also complete control over our bodies and minds. Episodes of missing time are indicative of their ability to seemingly manipulate our memories at will, erasing entire stretches of time and even inserting false screen memories to cover their tracks. Some of those who have had repeated encounters with them have described being in a strange state of hyper-reality, something very real yet altogether not. How is it that we can even trust our senses when dealing with such beings? The easy choice to make when considering the testimony of experiencers of this nature is to dismiss them as crazy and pay them no further mind, yet those brave enough to consider the possibilities will find that, after delving into their strange worlds, those who experience contact of this nature are far more than backwards yokels we've been led to believe. Like any serious claim of high strangeness, witness credibility is always the first straw man to fall. Many assumptions are made by those with a little experience dealing with the topic, and so I'll attempt to break it down piece by piece. Some of the more famous cases of contact involve memories recalled through hypnotic regression. This method is one that remains a bone of contention for skeptics, citing how easy it is to create false memories. However, those who take their practice seriously know all too well the danger presented by this, and, as discussed in previous episodes, will take great care to avoid this. Despite criticism, hypnotic regression has been used to great effect in solving crimes and treating buried trauma. The fact of the matter is that, even if we dismiss all memories reclaimed in this way, there are still a multitude of instances featuring multiple simultaneous witnesses, memories recalled without hypnosis, and witnesses of the highest credibility. Another myth we must address in dealing with the phenomenon of non-human contact is that of hoaxers seeking their 15 minutes of fame or even some form of monetary gain. While this is undoubtedly true to a certain extent, this fallacy is one that I find particularly bothersome because not only does it run counter to what actually happens to witnesses, it demonstrates a lack of critical thinking on the part of the accuser. First of all, let's try and put ourselves in their shoes. Let's assume the overall phenomenon is real and you've just had a bizarre encounter with strange non-human beings of unknown origin. Who would be the first person you'd tell? Would they believe you? What would be the consequences of you telling your story? The fact of the matter is that many witnesses do not want to come forward, and the ones that do oftentimes wish to remain anonymous. The ones that do come forward find themselves a pariah, attacked, ridiculed, careers and credibility ruined, shunned into becoming part of the only community who will accept them, that of other experiencers. Now imagine that someone you are close to comes to you with their own story of contact. How would you react? What signs would you look for to see if they were telling the truth or just delusional? I find it hard to believe that anyone hoaxing contact with non-human beings would be either sane or successful. Either way, I find it difficult to believe that it would be difficult to tell that they are either lying or crazy. While skeptics and naysayers ridicule those who dared to share these intimate and bizarre experiences, the truth is that these experiences often leave their victims traumatized. There are entire support groups for them. Imagine being awoken in the middle of the night, paralyzed, confronted by strange beings who are clearly not human, levitated out of your room and onto a craft where non-consensual medical procedures are performed on you. It is not uncommon for rape victims to hide their experiences for shame and fear of ridicule, so it's not hard to imagine that there are those who have experienced such trauma simply want to stay quiet about it. One can only wonder how many have not come forward. While the scenario I describe above is a common trope of modern-day encounters, it is far from the norm. Experiences have been as varied as the entities witnessed, and not all have been unpleasant. Some encounters are innocent and curious exchanges, leaving the witnesses in awe of what has just transpired. Others of those who have been visited have accepted these strange interlopers and transformed their experiences into a bond transcending the spiritual. I've often heard skeptics claim that there is no physical evidence of UFOs or extraterrestrial contact, yet this is another myth that requires dispelling. Physical evidence has indeed been left behind in the form of radioactive signatures, strange burns, and patterns in the grass where their craft have landed. Those familiar with the modern pop culture folktales of these types of encounters undoubtedly have heard of alien implants. Would it surprise you to know that some of these implants have been detected and even removed from their victims? These implants tend to be peculiar in composition, sometimes emitting detectable signals and even evade active attempts at removal.
Whether little green men, aliens, extraterrestrial biological entities, or even more recently, NHI, or non-human intelligence, the evolution of the terms in which we refer to them is indicative of our evolving understanding of them. While classically believed to be beings from another star system, there is surprisingly little evidence to suggest this. The evidence that does exist to this point is marred by the fact that the beings themselves are masters of deception. How is it that we can trust them at their word? I've been studying this topic for over 30 years now, and the more I learn, the less I feel like I know. The only thing that I am sure of is that something out there is watching us and stealing us away in the night. The sheer volume of encounters in their long history has solidified my belief in the truth of their existence. As to their nature, origin, and intentions, well, it's nearly impossible to say. For one thing, there isn't just one group of them. As I previously hinted at, there's a long history of strange creature sightings, and their appearance and behavior vary widely. Only recently, within the last few decades, has the iconic image of the alien gray taken hold on our collective imagination. The distinctively large head with enormous slanted black eyes has become a cultural icon ever since Whitley Strieber's 1987 book, Communion. His work on this topic is a guidestone to which I've often returned, in each publication opening up new avenues and insights. As much influence as he has in this regard, he himself refuses to say who or what these entities are, simply referring to them as the visitors. While I can't really claim to know what exactly is going on in the broader sense, the only rational way forward is to dive into this phenomenon from its early incarnation and lead all the way up to the present day.
On September 19th, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were driving home through New Hampshire when a brightly lit object in the sky began to follow them. Pulling over to get a better look, the Hills saw the object vanish right before their eyes. Disturbed by the event, the couple continued their journey home only to realize there was almost 2 hours of missing time they couldn't remember. This is easily one of the most famous and recognizable cases in the study of abductions, being one of the earliest and most credible. As with all encounters with non-human entities, the witnesses were met with skepticism and ridicule, along with all the social issues arising from that. What makes this case so compelling to me is the audio tape of their memories recovered through hypnotic regression. There are very few actors who could pull off such a convincing performance, let alone a postal worker and a social worker from New Hampshire. The emotion is real in Barney's voice. The fear is real. Anyone listening to his painful attempt at recall would have little doubt that his experiences were real, or at least he believed them to be. The entities that took them showed Betty a star chart of their home system of Zeta Reticuli, and she was able to reproduce it from memory. Skeptics will claim that it's too simple and not quite accurate. However, how many of us would be able to perfectly reproduce something like that from memory alone? On November 5th, 1975, Travis Walton and his logging crew witnessed an unknown craft in Apache Sitegraves National Forest near Heber, Arizona. Among his crew, Travis was the only one brave enough to step out of their work truck and approach this craft as it hovered silently over a clearing. As he drew near to the craft, a beam of light struck him, paralyzing him, causing him to lose consciousness and throwing him clear through the air over 10 feet. His crew fled in terror at the sight of this, and as a result, Travis went missing for 5 days. Upon his return, he had an incredible story to tell of being aboard a strange craft and interacting with non-human entities. Skeptics claim a possible motive for the hoax was to provide an act of God that would allow the logging crew to avoid a financial penalty for failing to meet their contract deadline. The problem with this theory, however, is that the company that hired them debunked that claim, not to mention the fact that he and his crew were nearly finished with the job. Since he was missing for 5 days, just where was he? His entire crew was under suspicion, and despite the possibility of arrest, they stuck to their story. Even after notorious skeptic Philip Klass attempted to bribe the youngest witness with $10,000, of which he refused. Travis, like many contactees, became the subject of ridicule in his community. He even had a brief falling out with one of his closest friends, the sister of whom he intended to marry. While Wikipedia claims his story has been widely regarded as a hoax, it remains a fact that he was subject to 16 lie detector tests and passed them all. For those who have been paying attention, mainstream sources like Wikipedia always seem to side with the debunkers on topics like these. However, with a little digging, more interesting details can sometimes be found. So why would a rugged group of outdoorsmen such as these hoax a story like that? Facing ridicule and possible arrest, why is it that they stuck to their story? How is it that their story hasn't changed or varied for over 50 years? On the evening of December 26, 1985, Whitley Strieber went to bed in his cabin in upstate New York only to be awakened in the middle of the night by intense light streaming through the window. He was taken aboard a strange craft by small, blue-skinned beings with large, dark eyes and underwent embarrassing and painful medical procedures before being returned to his bed. Remembering this one experience without the aid of hypnosis sent him on a path that would eventually trigger a cascade of other memories going all the way back to his childhood. Over the years, he's grown a relationship with a collection of non-human entities he simply refers to as the Visitors. Prior to these revelations, Whitley was a New York Times best-selling author. Having his non-human encounters come to light began a difficult journey for him involving extreme psychological and emotional turmoil, which culminated in him writing his first non-fiction book on the topic, Communion. There are a few takeaways here. First is the obvious. As a well-established best-selling author, why write an autobiographical non-fiction title about such a controversial topic? Why risk your livelihood and reputation, possibly your entire career? What did he stand to gain? If his experiences were deliberate hoaxes, why not just publish them as fiction then? As was to be expected, he had enormous trouble publishing Communion. Given its subject matter, he will be forever known as the anal probe guy to those who ridicule him to this day. It would seem insane to subject oneself to the backlash he faced, yet, for those who read his works, he seems anything but insane. There are many close to Whitley, friends and family alike, who have also experienced strange things while visiting his upstate New York cabin, some of whom demanded to leave early despite what was meant to be a longer vacation in the peaceful Adirondacks. Of all his skeptics and detractors, Whitley himself seems to be chief among them. Through his writings, he recounts undergoing a barrage of medical tests as well as describing a litany of possible alternative explanations as to what may have happened to him. I have read several of his works and can honestly say his level-headed approach to such bizarre experiences is unparalleled. Whitley, along with his wife Anne, have done much to help others who have experienced similar encounters with non-human visitors. The letters they received in response to Communion are archived in the Fondren Library at Rice University, chronicling contact from 1970 all the way through 2016. In 2007, Chris Bledsoe had nearly lost everything. While on a fishing trip with family and friends, he ventured out on his own to clear his head. A deeply religious man, Chris called out to the sky for help, and much to his surprise, something responded. Through a series of contacts, Chris has witnessed orbs, mysterious creatures with red eyes, and an ethereally beautiful angelic woman, among other things. One of his sons, having encountered the red-eyed entities himself on that first fateful night, was so traumatized that he didn't fully recover for years. Chris and his entire family were shunned in his religious community, even facing ridicule from his own father. His children were openly mocked in school, and his eldest son even ran away from home on more than one occasion. Having already lost his business, even fewer wanted to work with him now, thinking he was touched by the devil. As much pain and suffering as these experiences brought to him and his family, he had little choice but to let them guide him. Eventually, that guidance led him to being contacted by NASA and the CIA, and even miraculous healings and spiritual revelations occurred. For any of those who doubt him, they simply need to spend a night with him under the stars. Chris seems to have a knack for summoning these strange orbs for those who would doubt him, and he regularly does this to this day. He went on to document his ongoing experience in his book UFO of God. Among modern experiencers, he is considered one of the more credible, with several prominent names in science and intelligence communities backing his experiences and the ability to call upon the orbs to show themselves. It's really hard to doubt his validity. Pair that with the sheer amount of suffering he went through during his journey through his experiences, juxtaposed to his honest, sincere nature, and one can hardly doubt him. Clearly, there are many, many more examples I could draw upon. However, there remains a common theme here. Honest, hardworking folks risking their careers and reputations, multiple witnesses, stories that maintain integrity all throughout seem to be the hallmark of these encounters. But there are always those who seek more, those who want hard evidence. Of that, there is surprisingly more than would be assumed by those who know little of the subject. For instance, there are many encounter stories dating way back to the early days of contact in which physical impressions are left on the ground after a craft has landed. These impressions have added credibility to stories that would have otherwise been dismissed out of hand by authorities and peers of the witnesses to these events. There are yet other cases of witnesses seeing material ejected from the strange craft of unknown origin. An event known as the Murray Island UFO incident occurred in Washington state over the waters of Puget Sound in 1947. Boat Captain Harold Dahl claimed seeing 6 large donut-shaped aircraft above his vessel, which then proceeded to drop various types of material, including very lightweight metal, as well as what resembled igneous stone. As the stones fell onto his boat, the material broke a shipmate's arm and even killed a dog on board. 2 military intelligence agents were dispatched to analyze the material, yet their plane crashed on the way back to California. The FBI then declared the entire incident a hoax, and I'll let you make of that what you will. Another such incident occurred in 1977 at Big Lake Park in Iowa. Witnesses described seeing a large round object hovering over the treetops before crashing down below the tree line. Upon reaching the apparent crash site, there was no wreckage to be found. However, there were piles of molten metal covering a 6 by 4 foot area approximately 4 inches thick. This material was collected and analyzed by Ames Laboratory and found to be consistent with smelter slag common in manufacturing. While there were 2 foundries in nearby Council Bluff, it is believed by many that there would be no way to transport the material without being seen or leaving heavy tracks in the area. How would they be able to get the slag to the area to dump it before it cooled, and more importantly, why? Another case comes from Brazil from 1957. Witnesses say they saw an unidentified flying object expel what appeared to be molten metal. Samples collected from this case all contained altered isotope ratios that cannot be explained. Stanford professor Dr. Gary Nolan said, quote, "The problem is there's no good reason humans have for altering the isotope ratios of a simple metal like magnesium." He went on to say that it can be done, albeit the process is expensive and the reason as yet unknown. Many claim to debunk these types of cases on the grounds that the material doesn't appear to be extraterrestrial in origin, yet I ask, how would we even know what that looks like exactly? As far as we know, the entire universe is working with the same periodic table, so would something alien really appear as such? We simply have no frame of reference. During one of his encounters, experiencer Chris Bledsoe was told not to get too close to the craft he was seeing as it could be hazardous to him. Many UFO witnesses report unusual burns and rashes after being in proximity of these strange craft. In 2010, the Pentagon's now disbanded Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Agency, or ATIP for short, released a report as a result of a Freedom of Information request. The report states that sightings have left witnesses with radiation burns, brain damage, rashes, amnesia, pain, and, quote, perceived time suspension. Much of the rest of the report is heavily redacted. This alone should be a clear sign that something is going on, and very powerful people are taking it seriously. It is fair to say that there's at least some physical evidence of the strange craft in our skies, but what about their occupants? Witnesses have been having encounters with strange, apparently non-human entities for as long as there have been sighting of their craft. However, sightings alone do little to convince skeptics of anything other than the questionable mental health of the witnesses. But, much like the impressions of landing gear on the ground, so too do the visitors themselves leave traces upon the bodies of those they steal away in the night. Scoop marks, scars, strange triangular wounds, and other bodily anomalies are common among those who experience contact. Many women have even found themselves pregnant only to have their pregnancy disappear one morning without a trace. Needless to say, this is traumatic for anyone, husband and wife included. We'll get more into the hows and whys of these topics later, but for now there's one final piece of physical evidence worth examining, the phenomenon of alien implants. Dr. Roger Lear had removed a total of 16 implants from patients before passing away in 2014. While there are many who question his credibility, one might wonder why someone with a stable career in the medical field would want to be known as the alien implant doctor. Skeptics claim that the implants do not resemble any type of technology and simply seem to be random pieces of metal of various sizes and shapes. That being said, there are still many strange things about these objects that remain unexplained. First of all, many of them appear magnetic in nature, and some even emit a radio frequency of 14.7 megahertz, a rather strong signal for such a small object. Most of these supposed implants are no larger than the point of a pencil. Upon closer inspection, some were found to contain nanofibers similar to carbon nanotubes, structures that are not naturally occurring in nature. As for how they got into the patient's bodies, there doesn't appear to be any points of entry. Stranger still is the fact that the objects themselves appear to have been accepted and even integrated into the patient's biology with no signs of inflammation, a fact of which is impossible if these objects were shrapnel or some other ordinary foreign body. Whitley Strieber recounts his own story of attempting to get his implant removed. His surgeon, who wished to remain anonymous, claimed that the object itself burrowed further into Whitley's body, actively avoiding removal. It remains implanted in him to this day. Dr. John Mack, who we'll be discussing later, also had a patient's implant analyzed, and it was found to be, quote, an interestingly twisted fiber consisting of carbon, silicon, oxygen, no nitrogen, and traces of other elements. Surely there's much more that can be learned from these objects in their study, yet unsurprisingly, according to Dr. Lear, no credible doctors want to come forward, proving yet again that most people don't want to risk reputation and livelihood for little to no personal gain. The skeptics will claim that there's no proof that these objects are otherworldly in origin, and yet again I ask, how would we know? As we dig deeper into this phenomenon, the evidence becomes more and more personal. While physical evidence is telling, the psychological effects on witnesses can be just as impactful. Acting is a difficult skill, and it's safe to say that most people aren't very good at it. Certainly not enough to fool the head of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Yet as is the case with Dr. John Mack, he went from skeptic to believer. Dr. John Mack was indeed the head of Harvard Med's Department of Psychiatry from 1997 to 2004. During his time there, he was considered an expert and professional in his field. Having taught psychiatry and written several books on the subject, one can confidently say that he knew crazy from sane. Yet the moment he decided to seriously listen to witness accounts of supposed alien abductions, all of his prestige was thrown out the window by his academic peers. Despite professional backlash and intense media criticism, Dr. John Mack spent over 10 years studying 200 individuals who reported alien encounter experiences. To this day, he's considered one of the most esteemed academics to have studied the subject. While he initially set out to prove mental illness as the cause, he wasn't able to find any obvious pathologies in his patients. He also noted that contactees he studied developed a heightened sense of spirituality and environmental concern, and so too did his studies expand his own notion of reality. He began to believe that contact may even transcend physical reality itself, a notion that we'll soon explore ourselves. During his study, a Harvard committee secretly investigated his work, marking the first time in Harvard's history that a tenured professor was subject to such an investigation. The committee's draft report stated that, quote, To communicate in any way whatsoever to a person who has reported a close encounter with an extraterrestrial life form that his experience might well have been real is professionally irresponsible. After the confidential investigation accidentally became public, questions arose among the academic community regarding the validity of this investigation, citing that Dr. Mack had committed no apparent ethics violation. Harvard then responded by retracting their investigation and issued a statement that, quote, reaffirmed Dr. Mack's academic freedom to study what he wishes to and to state his opinions without impediment. Dr. Mack went from skeptic to believer simply by giving witnesses a chance to speak and actually listen, as so few often do. Tragically, Dr. John Mack was struck by a car and killed while crossing the street in 2004. Was this really an accident? Now that we've come this far, let's just assume that for the time being these craft are indeed here and their occupants are interacting with us. What can we say we know about who they are, what they are, where they're from, or what they even want from us? In order to do that, we need to sift through mountains of data. Contrary to popular belief, there are more beings encountered out there than just the short little grays we see on bumper stickers and on the covers of tabloid magazines. Since the very first encounters recorded in modern history, witnesses have described beings of all shapes, sizes, and demeanor. Tall, thin, pale-skinned beings with wispy white hair, large brutes covered in dark hair, small impish creatures with large ears, giant mantis-like beings, diminutive blue-skinned creatures, menacing reptilian-type entities, robotic constructions of an apparently artificial nature, and even tall, beautiful entities who look just like us. The list goes on and on. The most common encounters, however, are small beings with large heads and huge black eyes. Among the different types of entities encountered, there doesn't appear to be much individual variation except for the apparently human-like ones. Some have speculated that certain types such as the Greys are hive mind, perhaps even biomechanical in some way. This makes sense given their behavior, as they seldom show emotion, they all look the same and function as servants to other beings. In the future, we'd like to do individual episodes exploring some more of the more notable experiences witnesses have had because I personally find them fascinating. However, for our purposes today, let's break down some and try to find some common themes in an attempt to identify our visitors and their possible motives. In the 1980s sci-fi classic Total Recall, the mutant Quato had a brilliant quote explaining the mystery of identity. We are what we do. Even the Bible states that, quote, by their deeds ye shall know them. It is true that, while conversation certainly opens the door in getting to know someone, seeing how they behave in various scenarios reveals infinitely more about their character. The visitors, as it turns out, are generally beings of few words, and the few words they do convey are often cryptically enigmatic. In lieu of words, we must then turn to their behavior in order to glean some insight as to who they are and what they want from us. Their form of communication appears largely symbolic in nature, preferring to show us rather than tell. Much like interpreting a strange dream, we're often left to unravel the meaning of these encounters by painstakingly analyzing every detail. Whitley Strieber does an excellent job unpacking this in his latest book, Them, which is a fascinating read to say the least. On the surface level, they all seem to be more advanced in a technological sense, yet when we dig a little deeper, we find that there's a component of high strangeness to their behavior, suggesting that linear development in the technological sense doesn't appear to explain. The ability to pass through walls, float along the ground, appear and disappear at will, engage in telepathic communication, and influence dreams and memory suggests the possibility of a development beyond the technical and bordering on the spiritual. Some contactees even recount these strange visitors' ability to see beyond the veil of life and death, and at times arranging reunions with lost loved ones. One of the biggest commonalities in the messages they convey is that of environmental protection. Often contactees are shown images of destruction and environmental collapse as a stark warning of what may come if we fail to evolve as a species. In contrast to this is their apparent lack of consideration for our laws, customs, and even feelings as individuals. If they truly want to help us as a species overcome our destructive nature, their approach seems rather contradictory to say the least. These visitors can just as easily be described as invaders, given their habit of entering our homes uninvited in the middle of the night and taking us against our will. Trespassing, kidnapping, subjecting us to non-consensual medical procedures all seem contradictory behavior towards a supposedly benevolent end. However, if we take a step back and analyze this further, we can start to actually make sense of it. As advanced as they appear to us, the argument can, and has, been made that the gap in development is akin to us and lab animals, creatures of which we routinely abduct and perform non-consensual experiments on. Sometimes these tests are for the greater good of their species, and sometimes there's mutual benefit, yet other times it seems simply for our own selfish ends. It stands to reason that the visitors also have something to gain by abducting us. Many contactees claim there's a human hybrid program, where human and non-human genetics are mixed, as evidenced by missing pregnancies and other procedures. In light of their casual disregard for our feelings, perhaps their warning for our future aren't so human-centric. The planet itself is teeming with life of all kinds. It would be a shame if one rogue species ruined it for everyone. In a lot of accounts I've read, the visitors do seem to care for us in a way, yet their motives are not entirely unselfish, and their methods are more akin to tough love of a parent. As upsetting as their appearance may be to some people's lives, there are those who have learned to embrace them and transcend their trauma and fear. In his classic book Communion, Whitley Strieber recalls an experience where he was angry with his abductors, claiming that they don't have the right to take him, whereas the being simply responds, quote, "We do have the right." What right was given them, and by whom, I wonder? Perhaps in the wild, ability simply grants one the right. No zoo animal has ever confronted us with this dilemma. What gives us the right? As Whitley's experiences developed, eventually his abductors became teachers, bringing him to a place where he could experience joy, view past lives, teaching him how to have out-of-body experiences, and even warning him against indulging in too much of his addiction to chocolate. Just like Dr. John Mack, the road to understanding these experiences often leads to enlightenment, not of the classical sense, but something new, something perhaps forgotten, and maybe even one day reclaimed. So who are they, and just where do they come from? Well, simply put, no one really knows. With as many different types and encounters, they could come from many different places. With a universe as large as ours, it stands to reason that they would. Looking at the diversity of life on our planet alone, it seems reasonable to assume that the universe itself is no exception. Could they come from other star systems? Possibly. There are contactees that recount the visitors themselves claiming this, such as in the case of Betty Hill's star chart. Yet there are still others who witness their craft on a regular basis, such as Navy pilots, who claim they never once saw these UAP go into space, but only underwater. Supposing we had an ancient high-tech civilization in the distant past that was somehow destroyed, yet remnants survived and hid themselves in secret bases underwater and inside mountains. There's also the case of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident in Suffolk, England, where Air Force personnel witnessed a landed craft in the woods. Upon touching the craft, one of the airmen jotted down page after page of binary code in a notebook, only to have it translated years later. The message claimed that the ship was a time machine from the future, yet another possible explanation. Dr. Stephen Greer, longtime ufologist, researcher, and founder of CSETI, Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, claims that entity encounters fall into two distinct camps. The ones abducting us, he claims, are all artificially engineered by covert deep black budget programs, while real ETs are always benevolent in nature. These are interesting points to consider, yet his view is based solely on supposed insiders and his work successfully summoning UAP with groups of people using his CE5 protocol. Much of his work can be seen in numerous documentaries, all of which are worth watching. Of course, many deeply religious people like to claim that they are demons, yet I haven't seen evidence to suggest that these beings are evil, at least not demonically so. Chris Bledsoe's community shunned him for this very reason, yet he went on to heal people and change people's lives for the better. There are always those who will claim that they come from another dimension, and yet in order to really understand this theory, we have to know what that term actually means. Given our past work on life after death and visits from the other side, these planes could be considered another dimension, and with how we've seen these entities to behave, one could postulate that they have the ability to walk between worlds like the wizards of old. In the skull experiment that we covered in the past, they were able to capture video of what appeared to be an alien gray on 2 accounts, and also witnessed tiny UFOs the size of dinner plates flying around the seance table. There are those even who, under the influence of intense psychedelic trips, witness both apparent extraterrestrial entities and UFOs as well. Perhaps my favorite theory comes from the famous Jacques Vallée in his classic work, Passport to Magonia. In it, he carefully illustrates the innumerable similarities between encounters with fey creatures and other similar tales from the pre-modern age and modern UFO encounters. These fairy tale creatures go by many names depending on the region, and at the time, they were all taken seriously. They traveled in strange craft, appeared strange to those who witnessed them, seemed to have supernatural powers, abducted people into their worlds, and the list goes on and on. Perhaps the truth is a mix of all these things, the theory that I truly enjoy. The only thing I know for certain is that this world is much larger and much stranger than most would ever dare to believe.
What I think nobody has explored yet is that literally no one benefits from this behavior. Not the contactees, not the government, not even the alleged extraterrestrials. The human contactees are, in the very best situations, only damaged in professional or personal reputation. At worst, they're literally raped or forced to undergo unnecessary and involuntary medical procedures. The extraterrestrials, while often reported to be highly concerned with environmental protection, don't actually appear to be contacting anybody that has any sway on environmental policy or even the environmental impact of anybody besides themselves and their immediate family. Governments all over the world are claiming to be trying to figure out what these things are, but I've yet to see any footage that actually suggests they're doing that. Why are we in a situation where nothing ever gets resolved and people only get hurt? People, even extraterrestrial people, don't do things without a motive. So what is it? Who's benefiting? What information are we missing that would make this make sense? Stay tuned for our next episode. Paranormalcy is co-written by Matthew and Sarah Migliarese. Matt produces the podcast and contributes all of our music, and all of our art is done by Sarah. To support our work, please visit our website in the link below, where you can contribute to our crowdfunding, purchase the Paranormalcy book, and enjoy more of our art and music. We encourage you to reach out to us and share your own paranormal experiences. Our email address can be found on our website and in the link below. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.